Adam asked me to say something about Zeb. I knew Zeb as one of the Master of Sacred Music students at Luther Seminary. I was asked to come and teach there, and I was told that there would be only a couple students or so. And there were more students than I had anticipated or the seminary had anticipated. And as the faculty members often told me, the other faculty members at the seminary told me, they were some of the best students at Luther Seminary. Zeb was among them, and he was one of the better. And when he finished his Master of Sacred Music degree, he went on to take some fine positions and to do a good deal of church music. And among the things he did was to write compositions. And Love is the Key is one of them. And this is the 25th anniversary of the Raabe Prize, and he won it.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, gosh, it seems like a long time ago, the days at Luther Seminary, but the number of, this isn't directly related to the Raabe Prize, except that it is, because all church musicians can be composers, should be composers, I think, for their local contexts, for their parishes.
Well, Zeb, may I just say, church musicians are in fact composers, even if they don't know it or think they're not. They improvise and they do all kinds of things to fit their particular situation.
And those were some of the skills that we learned in the sacred music program at Luther.
Of course, but that's a necessary skill indeed. So, and you should say something about yourself as well. I didn't say very much about yourself. You ought to explain something that led you to do these things.
Sure. Well, I wrote music off and on while I was in college. Before I came to Luther Seminary and St. Olaf, I remember writing some settings of William Butler Yeats poems for a small men's ensemble to sing, TTBB ensemble to sing at my senior recital. And I wrote a setting of the liturgy for our Lutheran campus ministry at Ohio State. Co-wrote it with a friend who was a pianist, because I was not a particularly good pianist and wasn't, especially then, particularly good at writing for piano. But when I got to Luther and St. Olaf, that's when I had my first formal composition lessons with David Sherwin and Charles Forsberg. And then I started writing music for my parish, descants, psalm refrains, the kind of Gebraucht music for purpose, music for an occasion or an event or a service that was useful. I didn't have any intent of sort of doing anything with it. But after I met Carol Carver, who formerly worked for Augsburg Fortress as their choral editor, she had known of me and my work at Westwood Lutheran in the Twin Cities and asked if I had anything that I wanted to show her, compositions. And so I sent her a few of the things I'd written for my church, and what had proved useful in my context proved publishable because Carol and others at Augsburg thought it would be useful in a broader church context. And that was kind of how I got started composing more intentionally and more frequently.
Well, I should also say, Zeb, that your compositions have become useful in individual parishes. I'm not conducting a choir in my parish now. I'm singing in the choir with one of my students, one of your former colleagues. And he has chosen to use your pieces sometimes, and they turn out to be very, I'm not sure exactly what the word is. They fit very well on given occasions, and they're well crafted. And so what I've learned is that there are a number of church musicians who do things like that and we use their pieces, and we may think of them as composers because we only see their pieces. But in fact, they seldom are just composers, nor do they set out to be composers. They set out to be church musicians, and composition happens in the midst of it. And I think that's what happened with you.
It is, and I think the writing because there's a need to write something. I remember writing a concertato on "Love Has Come, a Light in the Darkness." That I think the author of that text is Ken Bible. It's in the ELW and was new in the resources that preceded ELW, new to Lutherans anyway. And I couldn't find anything on that text, and I couldn't find anything on the tune, which is Un Flambeau, Bring a Torch to Jeanette Isabella. Couldn't find anything on the tune that I liked, so I wrote something because I wanted to use that hymn in worship, not because I wanted to compose a piece necessarily, but because I couldn't find what was useful. And I think the benefit of writing for a particular group of people, be it your own church choir or a friend's choir, or your own skills at the keyboard, is that it isn't some sort of abstract concept that requires highly trained professionals to pull off. You're writing something that real people can realize, and that kind of drives you toward a practical approach to things like voice leading and ranges and tessituras and things like that.
So, how did this piece come to be, Zeb?
Well, love is the key. This is a good question. And it's been so long now, 15 years, I think, since I wrote it, maybe 14 years, that I was trying to remember the genesis. I think it came about because, like a lot of people, I keep a file of scripture passages and poetry, and other bits of the written word that are meaningful to me. Some things that I just go back to for personal devotion or inspiration, and other things that are potential texts to consider setting to music. And when I was in my doctoral program at Michigan State University, there were a couple of other classmates of mine, all of whom were choral conductors and musicians, sort of performing musicians first, and coming to composing later. And we decided we were going to get all of our classmates together, buy them pizza, and try to do a recording session. And we were all going to write one piece for this recording session. And I didn't really have anything that I needed a recording of, nothing, that was finished. So I went back through this file and I found this Christina Rossetti poem called "A Song for the Least of All Saints" that I had saved in this file, and then decided to sort of work that up for this little recording workshop that we were planning. I called it "Love is the Key," because that's the first line of the poem, and that is central to the poem. The title that Rossetti gives it, "A Song for the Least of All Saints," is kind of a parenthetical title, kind of a self-commentary. And it didn't seem right for the title of a sacred anthem necessarily. Whereas that first line sums up what the whole poem is about, which is about the love of Jesus and the denial of Peter, and the feebleness of our own faith apart from the work of the Spirit and the love of Christ. So I wrote this for this workshop, and we sang it once, and I had this little demo recording, and then I saw the call for the Raabe Prize. I think it was the 2011. It was 2010 or 2011, and I sent it in. And after it won, I didn't have a particularly good recording. I just had our little demo. Chris Osbos, and who was at the time director of Magnum Chorum and is now at Texas Christian University, Chris Osbos was very kind to perform it with Magnum Chorum in that next year or so. And then Alan Hightower, who is at North Texas University, University of North Texas, and was formerly at Luther College, recorded it with the Nordic choir. But that was the first, it was not really a piece I wrote necessarily for my choir or my church or a group of musicians like the chapel choir, Lutheran Summer Music, that I was regularly working with. It was sort of a piece I wrote just to write it, and then we recorded it, and it had some luck and success.
Can you say something about what generated the beginning of this piece? Second, third, moving to a fifth, this introduction that sets up then the rest of the text with just love is, love
Yeah.
is, love is.
Yeah. So the poem has three stanzas. The first stanza of the poetry starts and ends with the phrase, love is the key. The word love occurs a couple of other times in the poem, but that framing in the first stanza seemed to me to be a framing for an entire choral setting. So I build this little kind of cluster chord on the words love is, starting in the basses and going up, as you described. Uh, and then I use that as a refrain between the settings of the three stanzas.
What generated the cluster?
Um, I think probably the second phrase of the first stanza of the poem, which is love is the key of life and death, of hidden heavenly mystery, of all Christ is, of all he saith, love is the key. So this idea of of mystery, of a heavenly mystery or hidden mystery, cluster chords, major seconds against each other, where you don't know really where tonic is, so you can't immediately establish, especially at the beginning of a piece, right? If you hear cluster chords, you don't have any context for what tonic should be. So there isn't necessarily a clear sense of home. It's a pleasant sound. It's a pleasantly dissonant sound, but it isn't a sound that drives you toward a particular landing pad, I think, for the tonic pitch. So that was kind of the cluster chord idea to capture that mystery.
Which I assume suggests that love is an all-pervasive reality of some sort, right? It's not, what shall I say, fixed upon one particular thing, but it relates to all of life in some way. I mean, one can deny it and screw it up. I don't mean that it's there
Yeah.
systematically, but it is a pervasive reality that one can live in.
Well, and it's expansive, it grows. I mean, it encompasses
Right.
um, more than we know and more than we realize. It's funny. We're recording this today. Mike, a little weepy. We're recording this today on the first day of school here in Durham, North Carolina, where I live. It is the first day of classes here at Duke University, where I teach. It's the first day of school for my daughter, who starts middle school today at the School for the Arts. And I was talking with our neighbor, whose daughter just left for college, and she got a little teary talking about how empty the house feels. And yeah, love is the key of life and death. It encompasses more than we understand and kind of realities beyond what we experience. And it's not always easy. It's not always
Right.
simple, but I think, and I think what is explicit to you when you're writing a piece of music and what is implicit are not necessarily the same thing. I memorized the poem before I started to write the music because that's kind of how Dave Cherwin taught me, as he was taught by Alice Parker. Let the music that is inherent in the poetry kind of come out naturally as much as that's possible.
So did the poem generate that initial melody line after the introduction?
I think so. When you memorize the poem first, we're also recording this on the day that we were joking about it before Adam pressed go on the Zoom recording. today is the day that the music notation program finale announced that it will be ending, which is relevant because I think sometimes we go to the piano or we go to the computer too quickly. I was taught through my kind of lineage of teachers to, if you're going to write vocal music, you're going to write choral music, learn the words first, memorize, put the text in your heart, and then sing it. If you can sing it, it's singable, and then put it on paper. Whereas if you go right away to the staff paper or to the piano or something, you can conceivably come up with something that isn't necessarily less musical or unachievable, but maybe a little less vocally idiomatic. So yeah, I mean, my process was to memorize the poem and then start sort of singing it to myself. So I think it is fair to say the melody probably sort of grew out of how I understood the poem, at least.
And it's interesting when you say that. I have done some composing, but I haven't composed nearly as much as people like you. But it is interesting to me that during the night in my sleep, I think of there are musical lines going through my mind. They might be a line of a hymn, but they might be a line of a hymn text without the tune that I know. And somehow my head supplies the musical line that goes with it.
Mhm.
I'm sure I'm not alone in that regard. And those of you composers, probably based on what you just said, must probably do this more than I do. I don't know.
I think it's true of all of us. I mean, I think we spend so much of our time and lives encountering melody and lyric, that they start to, I don't know, fuse or intermingle. And I suppose if we're lucky, new things are generated from that store of um, of of wealth. How do you say anything new? How do you write a new poem? How do you write a new piece of music with only the notes of the diatonic scale and some secondary dominants or whatever? Yet somehow we are constantly generating things that are new, not without hallmarks or callbacks to things that have come before, but there's a very fertile, I think, genesis that happens in our heads and in our spirits when we're not even conscious of it.
Did you learn from the people who awarded the Raabe Prize anything about why they chose your piece?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't really remember. I know that the criterion related to both, a pattern of composition. This wasn't sort of a young composers contest, or anything like that. They wanted people who had already had practice at writing, and something that connected to the Lutheran heritage of worship and a Lutheran theology of worship and music. I think was important. At least I seem to remember that at the time. Um, I think the particular musical piece of this, I think music that not all the Raabe Prize winners, and I know this because several years after I won the prize, I chaired the committee that evaluated prize submissions for a few years. And sometimes we've awarded pieces that are much larger scale kind of things, not the kind of thing you would do in a liturgy.
Did this one have a time limit on it? Right.
I don't believe that the committee imposed any restrictions. I think the criterion were sacred works representing kind of a history of composition on the part of the composer, and with preference for works that reflect a Lutheran understanding of worship and sacred music. Um, and
But this would not have to be restricted to a Lutheran understanding.
no,
Any number of congregations and any number of denominational affiliations could do this.
in fact, when I got to Duke 5 years ago, and was planning my first season with the Duke Chapel Choir and looking through the library, they had one of my pieces in the library, and this was it. So they had some years before.
In a
Uh,
Methodist school.
yeah, well, yes, the Divinity School is Methodist, the chapel is ecumenical, but this was something that the choir had done. So there's, and Christina Rossetti is brilliant. I mean, those poems speak um, to many, many people. But I think Lutherans would recognize at the center of a poem like this, firstly, the love of Christ through life and through death. And secondly, that final stanza where the poet says, ah, Lord, I have such feeble faith, um, but love, your love, is strong as death, and I love thee. So that idea that we're not kind of saved by our own faith, our own merits, that love is a gift, is central to many people's understanding of the gospel, I think, but certainly to ours.
But it also, this is also, I'm not sure how much of this is thought out, but my sense is I have studied the music of choral composers, is that they're infused by a sense of God's grace.
Hmm.
That I mean, and it's very difficult to figure out how that is, or if it is, or if music just makes it easier to do this or something, because music itself is a gift of God, as Luther would say.
Hmm.
But it fits into a large spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's a gift. It's it's it is a gift of grace, and it is grace filled. I mean, it's also
Right.
very it's also sort of delightfully beautifully foolish, right? I mean, that we take this lump of cartilage
Right.
that exists in the middle of our neck, and may or may not have any particular physiological purpose. I mean, certainly, was it designed for singing? I mean, that's a probably an open question, and the answer depends on who you ask. But we vibrate this cartilage like you would hit the head of a animal skin on a drum, or pluck a catgut string on an
Or
instrument, and
as you would blow wind through something, that's more likely.
these fleshy human imperfect kind of uh, ways of producing sound, and then the sound combines into something beautiful and um, more lovely than the sum of its parts. It's one of the reasons why I would prefer to listen to or write for congregations or ensembles of any type. I think the prowess of an individual musician doing their thing is wonderful, but I'm always more impressed and moved by what's possible when we're working together.
That's exactly true. And just last Sunday, yesterday, I experienced the same thing in my church. There's no choir during the summer, but the hymn singing by the congregation in this small congregation, it's not a large, fancy, extravagant place at all. It's just a small congregation. But the hymn singing is always very fine. And yesterday it was especially fine. It is always grace filled. And fine choral anthems like yours are always in the same condition, I think.
Thank you. That's kind of you to say. I think there's something about um, music that grows out of the assembly's voice and the assembly's song. And I don't mean specifically hymn arrangements. Of course, that's part of it. But you were saying a few minutes ago about all of the fragments of hymn texts and tunes and things like that bounce around in your head at night. Um, I think those of us who write for the church, no matter how much we do it, um, are writing out of a place where all of that sound is a given. The warmth and the richness and the loveliness of um, the congregational voice, the assembly voice, has formed us. And I think maybe um, whether you know it or not, you're writing with that kind of in the back of your head, even if it's an anthem for a choir, even if it's, a motet or a little cantata or something.
Zeb, it is very difficult to put this into words, but this last book I just wrote, which you did the foreword for, is a book of reflections. As you know, it's an attempt to reflect on some of these things, and you do it always, what shall I say, imperfectly. You can't quite do what the music does, but the music just drives some of us to try to say something about why is this doing
Mm.
what it does and what does it do and how come it fits into the church and so on.
Mm. Yeah, and it comes out. Two things you said there that strike me is that it isn't perfect, and that it wants to find its way out of you. My spouse's mother died this past March, and shortly thereafter, um, well, it was we had gone to the funeral mass. Their family is Catholic. We had gone to the funeral mass, and there were maybe 60, 75 people at the funeral. Um, and um, and there were several hymns and parts of the mass liturgy that were sung. And the priest, when he got up to preach, commented on how wonderful the singing was and how lovely it was to be together to sing. And from an objective musician's perspective, I will tell you the singing was not all that lovely. It was not a huge sound. It was not a particularly aesthetically beautiful sound, but it was a human sound, and the people in the room were trying to sing together in a moment of sorrow. The music kind of found its way out.
And both in times of grief and
Yes.
joy and everything in between,
Yeah.
music tends to emanate from the whole thing. And it's not easy to describe how this works, but it does work.
Yes. So out of that experience, I started working on a text was started sort of coming to me, maybe in my sleep, certainly in the evening when I was tired, and then a melody. And so this is a piece I'm working on right now, and I am finding it to be quite a struggle. It it's not that the final result is going to be particularly complicated. It isn't, or the best thing I've ever written. It probably won't, but it's just not coming out right. Which just points out that maybe it's worth saying to any composers or people who would like to compose who have watched this far. It For some people at least, I don't think it suddenly becomes extremely easy all of the time. Some things come easily, some things are much more of a struggle. But I'll keep after it until it's turned out the way I think it's supposed to be, if that makes any sense.
Well, but in this world of um, nothing is exactly perfect, or even perfect without the word exactly, that's the nature of music. And I've often wondered about people like Bach,
Mm.
who's, I mean, he didn't write a whole lot about what he was doing. He just did it. But there is a certain competence that some people have that the rest of us don't. But nonetheless, we all participate in the same kind of what shall I say, push, pull, um, so the same kind of thing that generates doing these things, even if some of them among us don't do it as well as others do it.
Well, and that's yes, and I think part of that too is if we were just to sit on our hands because we recognized that we weren't as good at something as the models or the examples we looked to, there would never be any new music or any new poetry or any new art.
There would be nothing. There would be
Yeah,
no, right.
yeah, and that opportunity for growth. I mean, I think one of the greatest things that ALCM has done is to sponsor prizes like this, and also to sponsor workshops for people who want to learn to write music more and better, or to partner with Lutheran Summer Music to do some of the various initiatives that the two organizations have undertaken together. We can learn and grow both as individuals and as communities in lots of ways, both related to faith, but also our musical education and the things we can become capable of and competent at if we're encouraged and given room and a place to make mistakes. Not everything has to go perfectly in church every Sunday. You can try something out and decide afterwards that, well, that hymn tune didn't work very well, or that chorale prelude wasn't my best effort, and try something else the next week.
But there's probably nothing that is perfect. And grace and forgiveness are part of what happens in the church. But our vocations, when we go out from the church, the same thing happens in our vocations. And it is such a reality of grace to know that you are forgiven when you screw up. And the music of the church I've always found to be helpful in this regard.
Yeah, I think with you there is forgiveness of sins, right? There's plenteousness of redemption. I mean, there's
And,
just a graciousness within the making of music.
and those lines are sung.
Yeah, right, right. And they come to mind, my mind anyway, because I can hear the music that to which I learned them. Yeah.
Well, do you have anything else you need to say about this piece?
I don't think so. It was I won't say it was a joy to write because I feel like writing is always a bit of a challenge. I'm pleased to have written. I don't enjoy writing, if that makes sense. But I hope maybe that is some inspiration to others. If it feels like it's tough, then you're maybe onto something, and you should keep after it. That is certainly how we get better at things. And apart from that, Paul, as always, it's just a joy to talk to you. Thank you for the gift to the church and to church music that you have been.
And it's a joy to talk to you and to have had you as a student and to know you as a graduate. Thanks.
Thank you.